She faced the gallows alone, until feared outlaw walked into the courtroom and called her his wife. The sun hung low over Redspire, painting the dusty streets in shades of orange and gold. The town seemed quiet at first, but as people gathered near the courthouse, a tension filled the air that was heavier than the summer heat. Whispers moved through the crowd, eyes darting to the wooden building where Clara Bell, hands bound and heart racing, waited at the gallows. She was young, no more than 25, with hair the color of autumn wheat, tangled and dusty from a long night's ride. Her green eyes held a mixture of fear and determination. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she stood, accused of stealing vital supplies from the interstellar transport depot, an offense that could cost her life. The townsfolk had their own theories. Some claimed she was guilty because of rumors, others because of old grudges. The sheriff, a stout man with a scar running across his cheek, tried to maintain order, but the crowd pressed closer, eager for the spectacle. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed, while older men whispered about justice and law. Clara felt their eyes on her like 100 tiny needles, but she refused to bow her head. If she showed fear, they would feel satisfied, and that was something she could not give them. Above, the sky was streaked with silver lines. Patrol ships of the galactic frontier glinted in the sunlight, moving silently between planets, their presence both reassuring and terrifying. Clara had watched them countless times, wondering if they could see the truth or if they would leave her fate in the hands of a mob who cared more about gossip than justice. She clenched her fists, the ropes biting into her wrists. Her mind raced with memories of the past few weeks, the stolen credits that were never hers, the betrayal of a trusted friend, the desperate ride across the desert to escape capture. Every decision had led her here to the edge of death, under the noon sun of Redspire. The judge appeared in the doorway, his black robes dragging against the wooden floor. He raised his gavel, and silence fell over the crowd. The hammer came down with a sharp sound that echoed through the town square. "Clara Bell," he said, his voice steady but heavy with authority, "you stand accused of theft against the galactic frontier supply line. How do you plead?" Clara took a deep breath. She had rehearsed her words over and over, knowing that one misstep could cost her life. "Not guilty," she said, her voice firm, carrying over the murmurs. The crowd reacted with gasps and whispers. Some nodded in disbelief, while others shook their heads, convinced that the law had already decided her fate. As the judge began to outline the charges and evidence, Clara's eyes scanned the crowd. Among the faces, she recognized a few allies who had tried to help her escape, but they were powerless here, watching from the edge of the gathering. Her father's face appeared in her mind, stern but proud, a man who had taught her how to survive in the harsh desert and the even harsher frontier politics. He would have told her to stay calm, to wait for the right moment, and to never give up hope. Clara clung to that thought like a lifeline. Then the courthouse doors creaked open and a shadow fell across the entrance. Heads turned immediately, eyes widening. The murmurs grew louder, mixing with the pounding of Clara's heart. She felt a jolt of recognition, and hope stirred in her chest. The figure that walked through the doorway moved with a slow confidence, every step deliberate, drawing attention from everyone in the square. The townspeople fell silent, unsure whether to be afraid or in awe. It was Dax Rylan, the outlaw who had become a legend across 5 planetary systems. Stories of his daring escapes, his clever schemes, and his fearless confrontations with lawmen were known everywhere, and yet here he was, walking into the courthouse without fear. His leather coat was worn but clean, his boots scuffed from countless miles traveled across deserts, planets, and starships. His dark eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Clara. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, but there was no humor, only determination. With a calm but commanding voice that cut through the tension, he said, "She is my wife." A stunned silence followed. The judge froze, his gavel midair. The sheriff's hand hovered over his weapon. The townsfolk could not decide whether to cheer, boo, or run. Clara's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The idea that the feared outlaw, the man who could vanish into the desert sands or warp across star systems, had claimed her as his own, seemed impossible and yet undeniable. Dax stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Clara's. He reached into his coat and produced a small, metallic device that glinted in the sun. The crowd leaned forward instinctively, curious and cautious. He placed it on the judge's desk, pressing a button. A holographic image sprang to life above it, showing Clara and Dax aboard a sleek starship, in a private ceremony witnessed by only a few officials of the galactic frontier. The light shimmered around them, a visual proof of the marriage no one in the town had ever seen. Clara's mind raced. She remembered the night aboard that starship, the quiet hum of engines, the stars stretching endlessly outside the windows, and the way Dax had promised to protect her no matter what. She had thought that moment was private, hidden from the dangers of the frontier, but now it was the only thing standing between her and the noose. The judge, adjusting his robes, looked from the device to Dax, and then to Clara. This is valid?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Yes," Dax replied evenly. "She is under my protection. Any attempt to harm her would be a violation of interstellar law, punishable across multiple systems. I am accountable for her safety." The crowd erupted into whispers and murmurs. Some called it trickery, others said it was courage, and a few simply stared in disbelief. Clara felt her legs weaken slightly, but Dax's steady gaze met hers. He nodded as if to say, "Hold on, I've got you." Her thoughts drifted briefly to the people who had wronged her, the friend who had lied, the merchant who had accused her, the transport officers who had ignored the truth. Each of them now watched Dax with unease. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. Clara realized that the stories she had heard about him were true, but they only told half the story. Dax was dangerous, yes, but he was also loyal, and he would not let injustice stand in his path. The sheriff stepped forward, trying to regain control. This changes nothing. She still stands accused under the law of Redspire. No one, not even the galactic frontier, can simply override local justice. Dax tilted his head slightly, his smile faint but confident. The law of Redspire does not supersede interstellar law. You may try to act, but the consequences will follow you beyond this planet. I suggest you reconsider. The tension thickened. Clara felt the ropes around her wrists cut deeper as the guard shifted, unsure whether to obey the sheriff or the outlaw. She swallowed hard, focusing on the calm in Dax's eyes. That calm had saved her before, and it could save her again. Time seemed to stretch, every second filled with the hum of anticipation. The crowd, the sheriff, the judge, they all waited, knowing that the outcome would not be simple. And in the middle of it all, Clara stood, no longer alone, her fate intertwined with a man whose reputation could shake the stars themselves. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty courthouse square, Clara felt a strange sense of relief. The gallows were still there, still looming, but the presence of Dax Ryland changed everything. For the first time in days, maybe even months, she dared to hope. Hope that she would survive. Hope that justice, or something like it, could still be found. And most of all, hope that the man who had walked into her life when she was most alone would not abandon her now. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some questioning, some fearful, some amazed. Clara's chest tightened as she realized that the next few moments would decide everything, not just for her life, but for the fragile balance of law, justice, and survival in this remote corner of the frontier. And as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, a chill wind swept through Redspire, carrying with it the whispers of the galactic frontier and the promise of a story that would not end at the gallows. The courthouse square was tense, the dusty air thick with whispers and uneasy. Glances. Clara Bell felt her heart pound like a drum. Dax Ryland stood beside her, tall and confident, but even he could not make the tension disappear. The townsfolk did not know whether to be afraid or amazed, and the sheriff's hands twitched near his holster as he weighed his options. "Step aside, Sheriff," Dax said calmly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "She is under my protection. Any attempt to harm her will be considered an act against the galactic frontier." The sheriff hesitated. His pride demanded obedience, yet the words carried weight. The frontier was not just a legend. It was a governing force that spanned multiple planets. To oppose it could bring more consequences than the law of Redspire could handle. Still, the sheriff's jaw tightened. "We enforce the law of Redspire first. No one, especially an outlaw, can simply walk in and declare someone free." Dax smiled faintly, but it was the kind of smile that sent shivers down the spines of those who knew his reputation. He lifted his hand, and the small device he had brought projected a holographic record into the center of the courtroom. Clara could see herself in the shimmering light, standing beside Dax aboard a starship, exchanging vows in a quiet ceremony witnessed only by a few frontier officials. The crowd gasped. Some tried to dismiss it as trickery, but the holographic images were undeniable. Even the judge leaned closer, eyes narrowing as he studied the projection. Dax's voice remained calm. "This is a legal marriage, recorded and registered under the galactic frontier law. She is my wife, and her life is my responsibility." Whispers erupted among the townsfolk. "The outlaw is telling the truth," one man said. "I've heard of this ceremony. It is valid." Another shook his head, unable to accept the change. "Impossible. How can he claim her? He is wanted across 5 planets." Clara's mind raced. She had trusted Dax before in moments of life and death. But now, as the proof of their marriage hovered in light above the floor, she realized just how bold he was. Boldness and danger walked hand in hand with him, and yet there was a quiet kindness that she had not seen in anyone else. She remembered their first meeting, when she had been trapped on a desert planet with no way to contact the frontier. He had found her, guided her through enemy patrols, and given her a chance to survive. Now he was here again, putting himself in danger to protect her. She felt a rush of gratitude and fear all at once. If he could face the frontier's law to save her, maybe they had a chance. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "This document is significant, but it does not erase the charges filed here. Clara Bell is accused of theft. We must determine if she is guilty or innocent." Dax's dark eyes met the judge's, unflinching. "Then determine it under the law, but remember, harming her in any way while under my protection is not a simple offense. You may find yourself facing consequences far beyond this planet." The sheriff's hand remained near his holster, but his expression showed hesitation. The law was one thing, but the outlaw before him was not someone to underestimate. He looked at Clara and then at Dax. The townspeople followed his gaze, tension growing like a storm cloud ready to burst. Clara's voice trembled slightly as she spoke, though she forced it steady. "I have done nothing wrong. I only tried to survive. I would never steal from the frontier." Her words carried more weight because they were not shouted. They were calm, sincere, and measured. People began to listen. Dax took a step closer to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Stay calm. Do not give them reason to strike. I will handle this." She nodded, drawing in a deep breath, feeling his presence as a shield. Outside, the wind swept dust across the square, and the twin sons of Redspire cast long shadows. The moment stretched, and Clara realized that the town's eyes were no longer just on her. They were on Dax as well. The judge signaled for the witnesses to approach. Merchants, town guards, and transport officials stepped forward, each presenting their account of the supposed theft. Clara listened, knowing that she could not change what they said, only respond truthfully when asked. Some of the witnesses faltered, unsure how to react with Dax standing beside her, his reputation looming like a shadow. When her turn came, Clara spoke clearly, recounting the events leading to her arrest. She described the journey across the desert, the ambush by rogue miners, and the efforts of a friend who had betrayed her. She did not embellish, she told the truth. Every word carried the weight of someone who had faced impossible odds. Dax's presence gave her strength. When the merchant who accused her smirked, she held her gaze, meeting the disbelief with honesty. The townsfolk began to murmur among themselves, shifting from gossip to contemplation. Some began to doubt the accusations, others simply marveled at the courage she displayed. Finally, the judge paused, rubbing his temple. "This is complicated," he admitted. "Normally, the law of Redspire would be clear, but with the galactic frontier involved and this marriage, I must consider the implications carefully." Clara felt a glimmer of hope. The law could be bent, twisted, and stretched, but Dax had placed her in a position where the judge could not ignore the consequences. She allowed herself a brief moment to hope that she might survive this ordeal. Outside the courthouse, a commotion stirred. People who had gathered at the edges of the square whispered urgently. Some were frightened, others intrigued, and a few dared to cheer quietly for the brave young woman facing her fate with the outlaw at her side. The town, which had moments before been united in a desire for punishment, now seemed divided. The presence of a man like Dax Ryland changed everything. The sheriff stepped forward again, trying to regain authority. "We will hold the court here, and the evidence will be examined. But be warned, anyone who interferes will be held responsible." His voice carried over the crowd, attempting to restore order. Dax inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the warning. "Understood, but remember, the law of Redspire does not exist in isolation." The galactic frontier is watching, and I am responsible for her safety. Consider that carefully. The tension in the courthouse grew. Witnesses gave testimony, each trying to assert their version of events. Clara spoke with patience and honesty, her words measured but firm. Dax remained calm, occasionally stepping forward to clarify a point or show the holographic evidence. His presence was both a shield and a statement. He would not let harm come to her. Hours passed, and the sun continued its descent. The crowd began to grow restless, but Clara no longer felt alone. The fear that had gripped her since her arrest had been replaced with determination and hope. Dax's bold move, walking into the courtroom and claiming her as his wife, had changed the balance of power. She had seen him in dangerous situations before, but never had she witnessed such unwavering courage and loyalty. Finally, the judge called for a recess, allowing the town to absorb what had transpired. Clara was escorted to a small waiting area, still under guard, though the sheriff's eyes held uncertainty. Dax followed closely, keeping a steady hand near hers, though not touching. His presence alone was enough to reassure her. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his voice low so that only she could hear. Clara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I think I will be, thanks to you." Dax smiled faintly. "We are not done yet. This is only the beginning. The frontier has rules and Redspire has its own laws, but together we can face whatever comes next." She nodded again, feeling the truth in his words. Alone, she had been vulnerable. Alone, she might have faced the gallows without hope. But now, with Dax at her side, she had a chance to survive, to prove her innocence, and perhaps to begin a new life beyond the limits of Redspire. Outside, the winds swept the square, carrying the dust and whispers of the townsfolk. The twin suns dipped lower, and shadows stretched long across the courthouse steps. Clara watched the crowd, realizing that the world she had known was changing in an instant. Alliances could shift, danger could strike at any moment, but she had a protector, one who would face the stars, outlaws, and lawmen alike to keep her safe. For the first time since her arrest, Clara felt a flicker of hope. The gallows no longer seemed inevitable. The desert, the town, and even the distant planets of the galactic frontier were no longer distant threats. They were part of a universe that she and Dax could navigate together. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, the courthouse square glowed with the fading light. Clara Bell knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. Challenges awaited, secrets would be revealed, and danger could strike from any direction. But for now, she had survived the first test, and the feared outlaw by her side had changed everything. With the stars beginning to appear in the twilight sky, Clara took a deep breath. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was hers to face. And with Dax Ryland, the man who had risked everything for her, she would face it boldly. The gallows were still there, a shadow of what could have been, but hope now shone brighter than the desert sun. The courthouse had emptied for the evening, but the tension lingered like the heat over the desert sand. Clara Bell sat on the worn wooden bench in the small waiting area, her wrists still bound, but her spirit braver than it had been that morning. She could hear murmurs outside. The townsfolk whispered about Dax Ryland, the notorious outlaw who had claimed her as his wife. Some spoke in awe, some in fear, and some in doubt. The desert wind carried their words in faint echoes through the courthouse walls. Dax leaned against the wall nearby, silent and watchful, his eyes scanning every corner. Even in stillness, he radiated control and confidence, the kind of presence that could silence a mob with a single glance. Clara watched him, trying to understand the man behind the legend. He had saved her once, and now he had stepped into the middle of Redspire, risking capture to claim her. He was dangerous, yes, but his loyalty was undeniable. "You know," Clara said quietly, breaking the silence, "I never thought anyone would come for me, not like this." Dax turned his gaze toward her, his dark eyes calm but intense. "You survived the desert, Clara. You survived betrayal. You are stronger than you realize. I only make sure no one ends your life unfairly." She nodded, her mind replaying the past few days. The ambush in the desert, the lies, the chase across rocky plains, the starlit nights hiding in the canyons. Alone, she had barely survived. But now, with Dax beside her, the impossible seemed possible. She could feel a spark of hope growing inside her, fragile but undeniable. Outside, the night deepened, and the desert beyond Redspire seemed endless. The stars glimmered, tiny points of light stretching across the dark sky, a silent reminder of worlds beyond their own. Clara had always dreamed of seeing more than the dusty streets and dry plains of Redspire, but she never imagined that her escape might come through an outlaw wanted across half the galaxy. The judge returned, his robes dragging quietly over the floor. He looked weary, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. He took a deep breath and spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence, including the holographic record and the witness statements. This situation is unusual. The law of Redspire and the law of the galactic frontier do not always align. But under these circumstances, I must acknowledge the validity of the marriage. Dax Ryland's claim stands. Clara Bell is under his protection." A stunned silence followed. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Free, finally, she was free from the immediate threat of the gallows. Yet even with this victory, she knew the frontier was not forgiving. Danger still lurked in the shadows, and there were enemies who would not accept Dax's intervention lightly. The sheriff stepped forward, his pride bruised but his respect growing. "I do not like it," he said gruffly, "but I will not challenge the frontier. She is yours to protect." Dax inclined his head, acknowledging the reluctant acceptance. "Thank you, Sheriff, that is all I ask." Clara's wrists were untied, and she rubbed them, savoring the feeling of freedom. The crowd outside began to disperse, some still whispering, some glancing at her with newfound respect. She stepped forward, looking at the stars that shone brightly above Redspire. The night air was cooler now, carrying the scent of desert sage and dust. "Come with me," Dax said, offering his hand. She took it, feeling the warmth and strength in his grip. Together, they walked toward the edge of the town where his sleek hoverhorse awaited. The ship-like horse shimmered faintly, powered by anti-gravity engines, a strange blend of frontier tradition and galactic technology. Clara's eyes widened at the sight. She had never seen anything like it, and yet it seemed perfectly suited to a man like Dax. As they mounted the hoverhorse, the desert stretched before them, dark and endless. The wind whipped through their hair, carrying the scent of adventure and danger. Clara felt exhilaration and fear mingling inside her. She was leaving Redspire behind, stepping into a world she barely understood, but she trusted Dax. He had earned that trust, not through words alone, but through action, courage, and a willingness to risk everything for her. The ride was silent at first, the only sound the hum of the hoverhorse's engines. Clara glanced at Dax, who guided them effortlessly across the uneven terrain. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. "Somewhere safe, at least for now," he replied. His eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any threats. "There are places beyond Redspire where the frontier law protects us, but we must move quickly. There are people who do not forgive easily." Clara nodded, gripping the reins tightly. She thought about her life before the arrest, the quiet ranch, the dusty streets, the small circle of friends. All of that seemed distant now, almost unreal. Her life had changed in an instant, and the stars above seemed to promise endless possibilities if she could survive the dangers that lay ahead. Hours passed as they rode through the desert night, the landscape shifting from rocky canyons to open plains. Clara felt fatigue creeping in, but she pushed it aside. Every mile brought her further from the gallows and closer to a new life, one that was unpredictable but filled with hope. Dax spoke little, but when he did, it was with a calm authority that made her trust his every word. "You've been brave," he said finally, his voice low. "More than most would be in your place, but bravery alone is not enough to survive this world. You must learn quickly, trust carefully, and act decisively. I will guide you, but you must be ready to fight for yourself when necessary." Clara nodded, absorbing his words. She had faced hardship before, but she had never encountered a world so vast, so dangerous, and so unpredictable. Yet with Dax at her side, she felt a strength she did not know she possessed. As dawn approached, the desert began to glow with the first light of twin suns rising over the horizon. Clara and Dax paused at a rocky outcrop, surveying the vast expanse below. Beyond lay a settlement protected by the galactic frontier, a place where they could rest and plan their next move. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sand and distant flora. "You've never seen anything like this," Dax said, his gaze sweeping the landscape. "This is the edge of the frontier. Beyond this, there are planets, starships, and dangers you cannot yet imagine. But it is also a place where freedom exists. You survived Redspire. Now we survive together." Clara felt a mixture of awe and apprehension. The desert had been harsh, the town unforgiving, and the gallows had almost claimed her life. Yet now, with the stars overhead and Dax beside her, she felt a spark of hope stronger than fear. She could survive this new world if she remained vigilant, brave, and smart. As they descended toward the settlement, Clara glanced at Dax again. He was an enigma, a man of danger, skill, and loyalty. She had trusted him before, and now she had no choice but to continue trusting him. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but she knew she would not face them alone. The settlement came into view, its structures glowing faintly under the rising suns. Hovercraft moved between buildings, and the air was alive with the hum of machinery and life. Clara realized that this world, so different from Red Spire, held possibilities she had never imagined. It was not safe, not entirely, but it was a chance for a new beginning, and she was determined to take it. As they entered the settlement, Dax guided them through crowded streets, careful to avoid attention. Clara's heart raced with anticipation and caution. Each step into this new world was a test, a reminder that freedom came with responsibility. Finally, they reached a secure building, hidden from the main streets. Dax deactivated the hover horse's engines, and they dismounted. Clara stretched her stiff muscles, feeling the tension of the night's ride slowly fade. The building was small but sturdy, a safe haven for those who needed protection from the chaos of the frontier. "You will rest here," Dax said, leading her inside. "Eat, drink, and regain your strength. Tomorrow we begin planning our next move. There are forces that will not give up easily, and we must be prepared." Clara nodded, feeling the relief of safety wash over her. She was free from Red Spire, free from the Gallows, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine a future. It would not be simple, not easy, and danger would follow, but with Dax by her side, she knew she could face whatever came. As she sat down and took a sip of water, Clara looked out the small window at the rising suns. The frontier stretched endlessly beyond, a world of opportunity, danger, and adventure. She took a deep breath, ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing that the feared outlaw who had walked into her life when she was most alone would continue to protect her, and perhaps teach her how to survive in a universe far larger and more dangerous than Red Spire had ever been. For now, though, she was alive, and that was enough. The rising suns of Red Spire had long disappeared behind the horizon by the time Clara Bell awoke. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of distant hovercraft engines and the faint creak of the building settling. She stretched, feeling the tension in her muscles from the long desert ride the day before. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe, but only for the moment. Dax Ryland stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out at the desert plains beyond the settlement. His expression was calm, yet alert, as if he could sense danger long before it arrived. Clara studied him quietly, remembering how he had walked into the courthouse yesterday, claiming her as his wife and risking capture to save her life. The thought made her heart beat faster. She had trusted him before, but now, seeing him here steady and unyielding, she understood the full weight of that trust. "You slept well?" Dax asked without turning. His voice was low, steady, and reassuring. Clara nodded. "Better than I have in days, but what happens next?" "There are still people who want me dead. Red Spire won't forget so easily." Dax finally turned his gaze to her. His dark eyes were intense yet gentle. "We face them carefully and smartly. We cannot change what Red Spire thinks overnight, but we can be ready for anything. You have survived more than most ever will. Now you will learn to survive the frontier, not just the desert, but the people, the law, and the stars themselves." Clara swallowed. He was right. The frontier was vast, unpredictable, and dangerous. She had barely survived the desert, barely escaped Red Spire, and yet she had made it this far. With Dax, she had a chance to take control of her fate instead of being swept along by circumstance. They moved quietly through the settlement, avoiding the main streets. Dax had allies here, others who had fled Red Spire or sought refuge under the protection of the galactic frontier. He led her to a hidden courtyard where a small hovercraft waited, sleek and compact, ready to take them beyond the settlement and into the desert's safer reaches. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, climbing aboard. "Somewhere no one can follow us quickly," Dax replied. "There is a canyon to the north, hidden from patrols and Red Spire's eyes. We can rest there, plan our next steps, and decide how to clear your name properly." The engines hummed as they lifted off, rising above the settlement's rooftops. Clara felt a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. The desert stretched endlessly below, shimmering faintly under the twin suns that now began to rise in the distant horizon. The frontier was no longer just Red Spire. It was endless, dangerous, and full of opportunity. As they glided over rocky plains, Clara asked quietly, "Do you ever worry about being caught?" Dax smiled faintly. "Of course, but worrying doesn't change the past or the future. We act. We survive, and sometimes we fight. You will learn the difference soon enough." The canyon appeared ahead, a deep crevice hidden by high rock walls. They landed smoothly on a narrow ledge, the hovercraft's engines quieting. Dax led Clara through a hidden path, brushing aside small rocks and loose sand. The canyon was a safe haven, isolated and secret, known only to those who had survived the frontier for years. "This will be our base for now," Dax said, gesturing to a small alcove in the canyon wall. "We can rest, plan, and train, but remember, Red Spire will not forget, and those who wanted you punished may come looking again." Clara took a deep breath, the crisp canyon air filling her lungs. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "I don't want to run anymore. I want to fight for myself and for what's right." Dax nodded approvingly. "Good, that is the spirit that survives in the frontier. You will learn quickly, and I will be here to guide you. But you must act, think, and trust yourself. Fear is natural, but it cannot control you." They spent the next hours preparing. Dax taught her how to handle a plasma blaster, how to move quietly over rocky terrain, and how to observe potential threats without revealing themselves. Clara was a quick learner, fueled by determination and the desire to survive. Each lesson brought her confidence, and she began to see herself not as a victim, but as a participant in her own destiny. As dusk approached, Dax signaled her to stop and look at the horizon. "Out there," he said, pointing toward the distant desert, "are the people who accused you, who wanted to see you hang. Red Spire's lawmen, bounty hunters, even rogue miners. They think they can control you. But now you are no longer alone. You have allies, preparation, and courage." Clara felt a surge of resolve. The memories of the gallows, the fear, the whispers of the townsfolk, they no longer held her captive. She would face them. She would survive, and she would reclaim her life. Night fell over the canyon, and the stars emerged in the dark sky like scattered diamonds. The twin moons reflected faintly on the canyon walls, casting silver shadows that danced with the desert wind. Clara and Dax sat near a small fire, the glow illuminating their faces. "You've changed," Dax said quietly. "You are not the same girl who faced the gallows yesterday. You are stronger, wiser, and ready to survive in ways most cannot imagine." Clara smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I had to change. I cannot let fear control me anymore. I cannot let them decide my fate." Dax's expression softened. "And you will not. The frontier is cruel, but it rewards those who are brave and smart. Together we can face anything. But remember, trust and courage are your greatest weapons, not just blasters or tech." The night passed with training, planning, and quiet conversation. Clara shared her thoughts about Red Spire, the injustice, and the people she had trusted only to be betrayed. Dax listened, offering guidance and encouragement, his presence steady and unwavering. She realized that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about understanding the world, learning its rules, and choosing actions that kept her alive. When the first light of dawn crept into the canyon, Clara was ready. The canyon walls glowed softly, and the desert beyond seemed alive with possibility. Dax handed her a small, sleek communicator device. "This will keep us connected with allies across the frontier. It is our link to information, warnings, and strategy. You will need it." Clara took it, feeling its weight, both literal and symbolic. She was no longer a prisoner of circumstance. She was preparing for the challenges ahead. And with Dax by her side, she had a partner who understood the frontier as well as anyone could, and who had proven that loyalty could exist even in the harshest, most dangerous places. Suddenly, a faint signal came through the communicator, a warning of approaching hovercraft, moving fast, bearing the emblem of Red Spire's lawmen. Clara's heart raced, but Dax's calm hand on her steadied her. "They have not forgotten," he said. "This is our first real test." "Are you ready?" Clara nodded, gripping her blaster with a steady hand. "I am." Together, they moved to the canyon entrance, shadows among shadows. The hovercrafts approached silently, their engines low but detectable to those who knew how to listen. Dax led Clara through narrow paths, using the terrain to their advantage. The lawmen of Red Spire had assumed she was helpless, but they underestimated her and underestimated Dax. When the hovercrafts reached the canyon, they found empty ledges, shifting shadows, and carefully placed decoys. Clara realized the truth. Survival was as much about strategy as strength. She followed Dax's lead, learning how to anticipate moves, distract enemies, and act decisively when the time came. The chase lasted hours, the desert night alive with light and movement. Clara's courage grew with each step, each decision, each narrowly avoided capture. She had faced the gallows alone once, but now she was not alone. She was learning to survive the frontier, to face danger with courage, and to trust in herself and those who truly cared for her. Finally, the hovercrafts of Red Spire retreated, frustrated and unable to catch them. Clara and Dax watched from the canyon's shadow as the threat faded into the distance. She breathed deeply, the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by exhilaration and a growing sense of freedom. Dax turned to her, eyes serious but proud. "This is only the beginning. The frontier will test you again and again. But today you learned the first lesson. Courage, preparation, and trust can turn even the most hopeless situation into survival." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth she had not felt in weeks. The gallows were behind her, Red Spire's judgment had failed to claim her, and the stars above promised endless adventure. For the first time, she understood the truth of the frontier. It was harsh, dangerous, and unforgiving. But with courage, skill, and allies, it could also be a place of freedom and possibility. Together, they looked toward the horizon, the twin suns rising in the distance, casting light on the path ahead. Clara Bell knew the journey would be long, filled with danger and challenges, but she was ready. The feared outlaw had walked into her life when she was most alone, and now she would walk forward with him, not as a victim, but as a survivor, ready to face the frontier and claim the life that had almost been stolen from her.